Marcus Rivera watched 25 doctors prepare to let the governor's mother die from a mistake he could fix in 60 seconds. Speaking up would destroy the invisible life he had carefully built for 26 years, but staying silent would destroy what was left of his soul. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The antiseptic smell of the intensive care unit had become Thomas Whitmore's entire world. For 17 days, the governor of Massachusetts had barely left the third floor of Boston General Hospital, watching his mother slip further away with each labored breath. The machines surrounding her bed beeped and hummed in a rhythm that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat, a mechanical symphony of failing hope. Eleanor Whitmore had raised him alone after his father died when Thomas was only 8 years old. She had worked 3 jobs to put him through law school, her hands cracked and weathered from years of cleaning houses and waiting tables. She never complained, never showed him anything but fierce pride and unwavering love. Now, at 72, her body was betraying her in the cruelest way possible. What had started as persistent pneumonia had cascaded into septic shock, multi-organ failure, and a cascade of complications that had the entire medical team shaking their heads in grim resignation. Thomas stood at the window of the private room, his reflection a ghost in the glass. He looked like hell. His normally crisp shirts were rumpled, his tie loosened and hanging like a noose around his neck. Dark circles shadowed his eyes and his jaw was rough with stubble. The office had stopped calling 3 days ago. His chief of staff had gently suggested he prepare for the worst and start thinking about funeral arrangements. The very thought made bile rise in his throat. Behind him, his wife Claire sat in the corner, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. Their 2 teenage children had been here earlier, saying what everyone believed were their final goodbyes to the grandmother who had taught them to bake cookies and told them stories of the old neighborhood where dreams were born from nothing. The memory of their tears still echoed in the sterile room. The door opened with a soft whoosh, and Dr. Richard Pemberton entered, followed by his usual entourage. Pemberton was the chief of medicine, a man whose reputation preceded him like a royal herald. He had trained at Johns Hopkins, published in every major medical journal, and his waiting list was 6 months long. He was the best of the best, which was why Thomas had pulled every string, called in every favor, to get him on his mother's case. Behind Pemberton came Dr. Sarah Chun, the pulmonologist, Dr. James Martinez, the infectious disease specialist, and a rotating cast of residents and fellows who all wore the same expression of professional sympathy. Thomas turned from the window, hope and dread warring in his chest. Governor Whitmore, Dr. Pemberton said, his voice carrying the practiced gentleness of a man who delivered bad news regularly. He glanced at the chart in his hands, though Thomas suspected he had already memorized every detail. I'm afraid the latest scans show no improvement. The infection has spread to her kidneys and her liver function is declining rapidly. We've tried every antibiotic protocol, every intervention. Her body is simply too weak to fight anymore, Doctor. Chun stepped forward, her face a mask of compassion. We've consulted with 25 specialists across 3 hospitals. Everyone agrees that we've exhausted all medical options. Her organs are shutting down, and frankly, it's a miracle she's held on this long. Governor, I'm so sorry, but it's time to consider making her comfortable. We're talking about hours, maybe a day at most. The words landed like physical blows. 25 doctors. 25's brilliant minds had looked at his mother and declared her beyond saving. Thomas felt his knees weaken, and he gripped the back of the visitor's chair for support. Claire was at his side instantly, her hand on his back, her own grief a palpable presence beside him. What about the experimental treatment we discussed? Thomas asked, his voice hoarse and desperate. The one from Sweden? I don't care what it costs. I can make calls right now. Okay, have it here by tonight, Doctor. Martinez shook his head slowly. Governor, that treatment requires a minimum baseline of organ function that your mother no longer has. Her body couldn't tolerate it. At this point, it would only cause her more pain. The kindest thing we can do is ensure she's not suffering. Thomas looked past the wall of white coats to the bed where his mother lay. She was barely recognizable, her face swollen from fluid retention, her skin a grayish yellow, her breathing assisted by a ventilator. Tubes and wires connected her to a dozen machines, each one fighting a battle her body had already lost. This couldn't be how it ended. Not for Eleanor Whitmore, who had survived poverty, discrimination, and widowhood with her head held high. Not for the woman who had taught him that giving up was never an option. How long? He whispered, the words barely audible. Doctor, Pemberton's expression was grave. If we remove life support, likely within the hour. If we continue as we are, perhaps 24 hours. But Governor, she's not conscious. The sedation is keeping her from pain, but there's no brain activity beyond basic function. She's not coming back from this. Thomas felt something break inside him, a dam that had been holding back an ocean of grief. His mother, his champion, his hero, reduced to a countdown clock. He opened his mouth to give the order to let her go, to end her suffering, when the door opened again. A man in a gray maintenance uniform stepped in, pushing a yellow cleaning cart. He was in his late 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and weathered brown skin. His name tag read Marcus, and he had the broad shoulders and calloused hands of someone who had worked hard his entire life. He stopped when he saw the crowd of doctors, his eyes widening slightly. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I can come back. Dr. Pemberton waved a dismissive hand. That's fine. We're just finishing up here. Give us a few minutes, but Marcus didn't leave. Instead, he stood there, his gaze fixed not on the doctors or the governor, but on Eleanor Whitmore's still form in the bed. His expression shifted from surprise to something else. Something intense and focused. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then he looked at the monitors, his eyes scanning the numbers with an unexpected precision that didn't match his position. The doctors were preparing to leave, murmuring their condolences to Thomas and Claire. Dr. Pemberton was explaining the paperwork that would need to be signed, but Marcus took a step closer to the bed, his cleaning cart forgotten. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Everyone turned to look at him. "Doctor," Pemberton frowned slightly. "Yes, what is it?" Marcus pointed at one of the monitors displaying Eleanor's vitals. "This reading here, the one showing her blood oxygen levels. When was the last time someone checked the ventilator setting?" Dr. Chun bristled at the question. "We check them every hour. This is a state-of-the-art ICU. Everything is monitored constantly." She turned to Thomas with an apologetic look. "Governor, I'm sorry. We should probably have maintenance come back later." But Marcus didn't move. "With respect, doctor, I've worked in this hospital for 30 years. I've cleaned every room, every floor, every unit. I've seen a lot of things. That number there, it's been slowly dropping for days, hasn't it? And that rattle in her breathing, that's not just fluid in her lungs. Something's wrong with the tube placement, Dr. Pemberton's face hardened. "Sir, I don't know who you think you are, but we have 25 specialists who have examined this patient. We know what we're doing. Now, if you'll excuse us, this family needs privacy." Thomas felt a strange stirring in his chest, a flicker of something he thought had died. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw not arrogance in his face, but certainty. The kind of certainty his mother used to have when she told him everything would be okay, even when it seemed impossible. "Wait," Thomas said, holding up a hand. "Let him speak." The doctors exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. "Governor," Dr. Chun began, "this is highly irregular." "My mother is dying," Thomas said, his voice stronger now. "What harm can it do to listen?" He turned to Marcus. "What are you saying? What do you think is wrong?" Marcus moved to the bedside, his movements careful and respectful. He didn't touch Eleanor, but he leaned in close, examining the placement of the endotracheal tube. He looked at the ventilator machine, then back at the monitors. "I'm saying that tube is shifted. It's not seated right in her airway. She's not getting full oxygen to her lungs, which is why her levels keep dropping, and that's causing everything else to cascade. The low oxygen is making her organs fail faster. Her body's suffocating even with the ventilator." "It's absurd, doctor," Martinez said, his voice sharp. "We x-rayed the tube placement just this morning. It was perfect." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Things shift. Patients move. Even when sedated, tubes migrate. I've seen it happen before." He looked at Thomas, then at Claire. "I'm not a doctor. I'm just the man who mops these floors. But I've watched 1,000 people in these beds. I've seen who makes it and who doesn't. And I'm telling you, this woman's body is still fighting. She's not ready to go. But she can't fight if she can't breathe." Dr. Pemberton's jaw tight. "Governor, this is completely out of line. This man has no medical training, no credentials. We cannot allow him to undermine the professional judgment of an entire medical team." Thomas looked at his mother, then at the janitor, who had seen something 25 doctors had missed or dismissed. His political instincts, honed over decades, told him that sometimes the most important voice in the room was the one nobody expected. Sometimes truth came from the places people weren't trained to look. "Check it," Thomas said, his voice carrying the command of a man used to being obeyed. "Check the tube placement again, right now. I want imaging. I want someone to physically verify it. Because if there's even a chance this man is right, and you send me home to bury my mother without checking, I will never forgive any of you. And neither will the medical board when I tell them what happened here." The threat hung in the air, sharp and clear. Dr. Pemberton's face flushed red, but he nodded curtly. "Fine, we'll re-examine everything. But Governor, when we prove that everything is exactly as it should be, I expect an apology on behalf of this man and his wild theories." "Fair enough," Thomas said. "But if he's right, doctor, you owe him more than an apology. You owe him my mother's life." Marcus stepped back, his expression calm and untroubled. He simply nodded once, then returned to his cleaning cart and quietly left the room, leaving behind a silence that crackled with tension and something that felt dangerously close to hope. The next 40 minutes felt like an eternity compressed into a single breath. Thomas stood frozen by the window while a flurry of activity erupted around his mother's bed. Dr. Pemberton had ordered a portable X-ray machine brought in immediately, his movements sharp with irritation. The other doctors huddled together, speaking in low voices that Thomas couldn't quite hear but could easily interpret. They were circling the wagons, protecting their professional pride, preparing their defenses against the absurd notion that a janitor could see what they had missed. Claire squeezed Thomas's hand, her fingers cold and trembling. "Do you really think he could be right?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of equipment being wheeled into the room. "All these doctors, Tom. 25 specialists. How could they all be wrong?" Thomas didn't answer. didn't know. All he knew was that for the first time in 17 days he had felt something other than crushing despair. Marcus had looked at his mother not with pity or resignation, but with purpose. There had been no hesitation in his voice, no doubt in his eyes. He had spoken with the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. Credentials be damned. The radiology technician positioned the machine and everyone stepped back behind the protective barrier. The X-ray hummed and clicked, capturing images that would either vindicate 25 doctors or validate a janitor's impossible claim. Dr. Chun pulled up the images on a tablet, her finger swiping through the digital films with practiced efficiency. Dr. Pemberton leaned over her shoulder, his face set in a mask of professional confidence. Then Thomas saw it. The mask cracked. Dr. Pemberton's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and his jaw tightened. Dr. Chun's hand froze on the screen, her mouth opening slightly. The other doctors crowded around, and a ripple of shock passed through them like an electric current. "What?" Thomas demanded, crossing the room in 3 long strides. "What is it? Show me, doctor." Pemberton straightened, his face now carefully neutral, but Thomas could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the edge of the tablet just a little too tightly. "The tube is shifted," he said, his voice flat and professional, stripped of all emotion. "It's displaced approximately 2 centimeters from optimal position. The tip is resting against the carina, the point where the trachea splits into the bronchi rather than sitting properly in the trachea. This is causing partial obstruction and severely limiting oxygen flow to both lungs." Thomas felt the floor tilt beneath him. The janitor was right. A man who mopped floors had diagnosed what an army of specialists had missed. "How?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "How did this happen? You said you checked this morning. You said everything was perfect." Dr. Chun stepped forward, her face pale but composed. "Governor, tube migration can happen. Patients shift position during turning, during routine care. It's a known complication, but you're right. We should have caught this sooner. The symptoms were there. The declining oxygen saturation, the increased ventilator pressure requirements. We attributed it to disease progression, not mechanical malfunction. You attributed my mother's death sentence to disease progression when it was actually a tube that slipped." Thomas's voice rose, the fury he had been holding back for 17 days finally finding a target. "You were ready to let her die. You were ready to have me sign papers to end her life. And all along she just needed someone to actually look at what was right in front of him." "Governor," Dr. Pemberton said, his tone clipped and defensive, "hindsight is always 20/20. We made decisions based on the comprehensive picture of your mother's condition. Her multiple organ failure is real. The sepsis is real. Repositioning the tube may improve her oxygenation, but it doesn't change the fundamental fact that she is critically ill. But it gives her a chance," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "It gives her a fighting chance. Isn't that what medicine is supposed to be about? Fighting for every possibility until there are none left?" The doctors exchanged glances, and Thomas saw something he hadn't expected to see in their eyes. It wasn't just embarrassment or wounded pride. It was shame. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat. "You're right, Governor. We should reposition the tube immediately and see if improved oxygenation helps stabilize her other systems. If the organ failure was being accelerated by hypoxia, correcting that could potentially slow or even reverse some of the damage." "Then do it," Thomas said. "Do it now." The next hour was a blur of activity. An anesthesiologist was called in to manage the delicate procedure of repositioning the endotracheal. Thomas and Claire were asked to step outside, and they found themselves in the hallway, pacing like caged animals. Other families in the ICU waiting area watched them with knowing sympathy, recognizing the particular hell of watching someone you love hover between worlds. Thomas pulled out his phone and scrolled through dozens of unread messages from his staff, from constituents, from political allies wondering when he would return to work. He ignored them all. Instead, he found himself thinking about Marcus, the janitor who had walked into the room at exactly the right moment, who had seen what needed to be seen. Who was he? How had he known? A nurse walked by pushing a medication cart, and Thomas stopped her. "Excuse me, there's a maintenance worker, older gentleman named Texas Marcus. Do you know him?" And the nurse smiled. "Marcus Rivera? Oh, everyone knows Marcus. He's been here forever. Sweetest man you'll ever meet. Always has a kind word. Always goes out of his way to help." "Why do you ask?" Thomas hesitated. "He just helped my family. I wanted to thank him properly." The nurse's smile widened. "That sounds like Marcus. He's got a gift, that one. My grandmother was a patient here 5 years ago, and Marcus used to stop by her room every night during his rounds. He'd talk to her, hold her hand when we couldn't be there. She said he made her feel less alone. Some people just have that way about them, you know. They see you. Really see you." Before Thomas could respond, the door to his mother's room opened. Dr. Pemberton emerged, pulling off his surgical mask. His expression was unreadable. "Governor, Mrs. Whitmore, you can come back in now." Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs as he and Claire rushed back into the room. The first thing he noticed was the monitors. The numbers had changed. His mother's oxygen saturation, which had been hovering in the low 80s for days, now read 94. Her heart rate, previously racing at over 130 beats per minute, had slowed to 110. Small changes, but to Thomas they looked like miracles written in digital green numbers. Eleanor Whitmore lay in the bed, still unconscious, still surrounded by machines, but there was something different about her. The grayish pallor of her skin seemed less pronounced. The labored rise and fall of her chest seemed easier, more natural. Dr. Chun stood by the monitors, her expression cautious but no longer hopeless. The repositioning was successful. She's already showing improved oxygenation. Her blood pressure has stabilized. It's too early to say definitively, but these are positive signs. Very positive. What does this mean? Claire asked, gripping Thomas's arm. Is she going to be okay? Dr. Pemberton chose his words carefully. It means we have more time. It means her organs are getting the oxygen they desperately needed. Whether she can recover from the damage already done, we still don't know. But the trajectory has changed. She's not actively declining, holding steady. And in medicine, sometimes steady is the first step toward improvement. Thomas felt tears burning in his eyes, but he blinked them back. How long before we know? We'll monitor her closely over the next 24 to 48 hours, doctor, Martinez said. We'll watch her kidney and liver function, her infection markers. If the improved oxygenation helps her body fight the sepsis more effectively, we could see improvement. But Governor, I want to be clear, your mother is still critically ill. This isn't a miracle cure. It's a correction that should have been made sooner, and I take full responsibility for that oversight. The admission hung in the air, and Thomas appreciated it even as fury still simmered in his chest. He looked at his mother, at the woman who had given him everything, and felt the crushing weight of almost having given up on her. What if Marcus hadn't walked in? What if he had stayed silent? What if Thomas hadn't demanded they listen? Where is he? Thomas asked suddenly. Where's Marcus? I need to find him, Doctor. Pemberton frowned. The janitor? He's probably on another floor. Maintenance staff have rounds throughout the entire hospital. But Governor, perhaps it's best to let this situation settle before you. I'm going to find him, Thomas said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Stay with Mom, he said to Claire, kissing her forehead. I'll be right back. He left the room and strode down the hallway with purpose. A man on a mission. He stopped at the nurse's station. I'm looking for Marcus Rivera, the maintenance worker. Do you know where I can find him? The nurse looked up, surprised to see the governor standing at her desk looking disheveled and desperate. Probably in the basement. The maintenance office is down there next to the old cafeteria. Take the service elevator at the end of this hall. Thomas followed her directions, taking the freight elevator down into the bowels of the hospital. The basement was a different world from the sleek, modern units above. The walls were painted institutional beige, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the air smelled of industrial cleaner and old coffee. He found the maintenance office, a small, cluttered room with lockers lining one wall and a battered desk covered in work orders. Marcus sat at the desk, filling out paperwork, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up when Thomas entered, and for a moment neither man spoke. Then Marcus set down his pen and removed his glasses. How is she? You were right, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. The tube had shifted. They fixed it. Her oxygen levels are up. She's stable. You saved her life. Marcus's expression remained calm, but something flickered in his eyes. A mix of relief and something else. Something that looked almost like pain. I'm glad, Governor. Your mother is a fighter. I could see that in her. Thomas moved further into the small office, the door closing behind him with a soft click. How did you know? 25 doctors looked at her. Specialists from the best hospitals in the country. They all said there was nothing more they could do. But you walked in for 5 minutes and you saw what they missed. How? Marcus leaned back in his chair, the old springs creaking under his weight. He was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folded on the desk. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and measured. I've worked in hospitals for 30 years, Governor. Not as a doctor, not as a nurse, but as the man who cleans the rooms after. I empty the trash. I mop up the blood. I wipe down the equipment. I'm invisible to most people, which means I see things they don't. That's not an answer, Thomas pressed, moving closer. You didn't just see something. You diagnosed a mechanical failure that an entire medical team missed. That's not janitorial observation, that's clinical knowledge. Marcus met his gaze, and for the first time, Thomas saw the depth of intelligence behind those tired eyes. I had another life once, a long time ago, but that's not who I am anymore. I'm just glad your mother has a chance now. That's all that matters. Thomas felt his political instincts sharpen. He had spent his entire career reading people, understanding when they were hiding something, when their words didn't match the truth beneath. Marcus Rivera was hiding something big. Who are you really? Thomas asked quietly. And don't tell me you're just a janitor. Janitors don't spot displaced endotracheal tubes. They don't understand ventilator mechanics. They don't walk into a room and read medical monitors like they're written in their native language. Marcus's jaw tightened. He looked down at his hands that were calloused from years of hard labor, and Thomas saw him wrestling with something internal, some old wound that hadn't fully healed. Finally, Marcus stood up and walked to his locker. He opened it and pulled out a faded photograph in a simple frame. He handed it to Thomas without a word. The photo showed a much younger Marcus, maybe in his mid-30s, standing in a white coat with a stethoscope around his neck. He was smiling, his arm around a beautiful woman with kind eyes. Behind them, a sign read, San Miguel Hospital, Guatemala City, Medical Mission Team 1992. Thomas looked up from the photo, his mind racing. You were a doctor. I am a doctor, Marcus said quietly, taking the photo back and looking at it with an expression of profound loss. or I was. Dr. Marcus Rivera trained at the University of Panama, specialized in emergency medicine. I worked in rural clinics across Central America for 15 years. I saw things you can't imagine. Children dying from diseases that could be cured with a $5 antibiotic. Women bleeding out in childbirth because the nearest hospital was 50 miles away on impassable roads. Old people choosing between food and medication. Thomas listened, transfixed. The maintenance office had transformed into something else. A confessional where secrets long buried were finally being unearthed. What happened? Why are you here mopping floors instead of saving lives? Marcus set the photo carefully on the desk. In 1998, I was working in a small village in the mountains of Honduras. Hurricane Mitch hit. You probably don't remember it. It wasn't a big story in state, but it devastated Central America. The flooding was catastrophic. Our clinic was overwhelmed. We had 200 injured people, and I was the only doctor for 3 days. No power, no clean water, limited supplies. He paused, and Thomas saw his hands begin to tremble slightly. There was a little boy, 7 years old. His name was Mateo. He had been swept away in the floodwaters and had a severe head injury. I stabilized him as best I could, but he needed surgery, real surgery in a real hospital. I called for helicopter evacuation. The pilot said the weather was too dangerous. I told him if we waited, the boy would die. Thomas felt his chest tight. He knew where this story was going and he didn't want to hear it, but he couldn't look away. The helicopter came, Marcus continued, his voice now barely above a whisper. I put Mateo on board with his mother. 3 other critically injured patients went with them. The pilot took off in the middle of the storm because I insisted, because I told him it was life or death. He looked up at Thomas and his eyes were hollow with ancient grief. They crashed 15 minutes later. Everyone on board died. The boy I was trying to save, his mother, 3 other people who trusted me, the pilot. 6 lives ended because I made a call I shouldn't have made. God, Thomas breathed. Marcus, that wasn't your fault. That was a tragedy, but you were trying to save them. I killed them, Marcus said flatly. I pushed when I should have waited. I was arrogant. I thought I knew better than the pilot, better than the storm, better than God himself. After that, I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I held the scalpel, I saw Mateo's face. Every time I had to make a critical decision, I froze. I started making mistakes, small ones at first, but they were growing, so I left. I came to America, and I found work where I couldn't hurt anyone, where the only lives depending on me were cleaning schedules and maintenance logs. Thomas sat down heavily in one of the metal chairs, the weight of Marcus's confession settling over him like a shroud. For 20 years, you've been punishing yourself. You've been hiding one of the most valuable skills a person can have because of one decision made in an impossible situation. Marcus shook his head. You don't understand, Governor. In medicine, one wrong decision is all. One mistake and people die. I couldn't live with the possibility of making that mistake again. So I chose a life where my mistakes only mean a floor doesn't shine as bright as it should. That's a price I can live with. But you just saved my mother's life, Thomas said, leaning forward. You walked into that room and you saw what needed to be seen. If you hadn't been there, if you had continued to hide, she would be dead. Instead, she has a chance. Doesn't that count for something? Marcus's expression was conflicted, torn between the hope Thomas was offering and the guilt he had carried for 2 decades. One right decision doesn't erase a wrong one. It doesn't bring those people back. No. Thomas agreed. Nothing can bring them back. But walking away from who you are, from what you can do, doesn't honor their memory either. It just means their deaths took 7 lives instead of 6. Because you've been dead too, Marcus. You've been a ghost, haunting hospital basements instead of living. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and true. Marcus turned away, his shoulders hunched as if under a physical weight. I can't, he whispered. I can't go back to that. The responsibility, the pressure, the possibility of failing again. It would destroy what's left of me. Thomas stood and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. I'm not asking you to go back to being who you were, but I am asking you not to waste who you are. My mother is alive right now because you couldn't completely bury your gift. Maybe that means something. Maybe that's a sign. Before Marcus could respond, Thomas's phone buzzed urgently in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw Claire's name flashing on the screen. He answered immediately. What is it? Is she okay? Claire's voice was breathless, caught between laughter and tears. Tom, you need to come back right now. She's awake. Eleanor is awake. The phone nearly slipped from Thomas's hands. What? She opened her eyes. She squeezed my hand. The doctors are in here now and they're saying, Tom, they're saying it's incredible. Her vitals are improving by the minute. They're calling it remarkable. You need to come see her. Thomas looked at Marcus, his eyes wide. She's awake. She's actually awake. Marcus's face transformed, the grief-worn lines softening into something that looked almost like joy. Go, he said. Go be with your mother. She needs you. Thomas moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. This isn't over. You and I are going to talk more about this. You saved her life, Marcus. That matters. That matters more than you know. He ran back to the elevator, his heart pounding with a wild mixture of relief and hope and gratitude. As he rode up to the 3rd floor, he thought about Marcus's story, about the terrible burden of guilt the man had been carrying, about the way one moment can define or destroy a life. He thought about all the people Marcus could have helped over the past 20 years, all the lives he might have saved if he hadn't been hiding in plain sight. When Thomas burst back into his his mother's room, the scene was entirely different from the one he'd left. Eleanor's eyes were open, cloudy and confused, but unmistakably alive and aware. The ventilator had been switched to a lighter setting, allowing her to breathe more on her own. Claire was holding her hand, tears streaming down her face, whispering words of love and encouragement. Dr. Pemberton stood at the foot of the bed, his professional mask firmly back in place, but Thomas could see the wonder in his eyes. "Governor, this is, frankly, astonishing. Her kidney function is already showing signs of improvement. Her infection markers are dropping. The improved oxygenation seems to have given her body exactly what it needed to start fighting back. We're not out of the woods yet, but this is the kind of turnaround we rarely see in patients this critical." Thomas moved to his mother's side and took her other hand. Her fingers, which had been cold and lifeless for days, wrapped weakly around his. Her lips moved, trying to form words around the breathing tube, and her eyes focused on his face with fierce determination. "It's okay, Mom," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "Don't try to talk. Just rest. You're going to be okay. You're going to make it." Leonard's eyes closed again, exhausted from even that small effort, but the ghost of a smile touched her lips. Thomas looked at Claire, then at the doctors, then at the monitors with their steadily improving numbers. A miracle, that's what they would call this in the press releases, in the medical journals, and the stories that would be told. But Thomas knew the truth. This wasn't divine intervention or random chance. This was one man who had refused to stay silent when silence would have meant death. One man who had seen clearly when everyone else was blind. One man who had been brave enough to speak up even when the entire weight of medical authorities stood against him. Thomas made a decision in that moment. Standing at his mother's bedside, holding her living, warm hand, he was going to find out everything about Marcus Rivera, and he was going to make sure that the man who had saved his mother never had to mop another floor again. Over the next 3 days, Eleanor Whitmore's recovery defied every medical prediction. The doctors who had been preparing the family for death were now scrambling to revise their prognosis hour by hour. Her kidney function improved from critical to merely concerning. Her liver enzymes began to normalize. The sepsis that had been ravaging her body started to retreat under the renewed assault of antibiotics that her properly oxygenated system could now utilize effectively. It was as if her body had been waiting for permission to fight back, and the corrected breathing tube had been the key that unlocked her survival instinct. By the 4th day, they were able to remove the ventilator entirely. Eleanor breathed on her own, her voice raspy and weak, but gloriously present. The first words she spoke were directed at Thomas as he sat beside her bed, reading through briefing documents he had been ignoring for weeks. "Why do you look so terrible?" she asked, her eyes twinkling despite her exhaustion. "Did someone die?" Thomas had laughed so hard he cried, and then he just cried, holding his mother's hand while she patted his head with the gentle exasperation of a woman who had raised a stubborn son alone. "Nearly, Mom, nearly." She was moved out of intensive care and into a regular room on the 6th day. The hospital staff treated her like a celebrity, a miracle patient they could point to when the darkness of their work became too heavy. Nurses who had been preparing her body for the morgue now brought her extra pudding cups and gossiped with her about their families. Eleanor soaked it up with the grace of a woman who had spent her life making people feel seen and valued, even when she had nothing. Thomas divided his time between his mother's room and his increasingly frantic attempts to track down information about Marcus Rivera. His chief of staff, Robert Chun, had pulled strings with the medical licensing boards, immigration services, and international databases. The picture that emerged was both remarkable and heartbreaking. Dr. Marcus Antonio Rivera had been a legend in Central American medical circles. He had graduated top of his class from the University of Panama's medical school, completed his residency in trauma surgery in Mexico City, and then spent 15 years working in the most remote and underserved regions of Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. He had been part of Doctors Without Borders, had founded 2 rural clinics that still operated today, and had trained dozens of local healthcare workers who went on to save countless lives. There were commendations, awards, and articles written about the selfless doctor who lived among the poor and treated everyone from farmers to rebels to government soldiers without judgment or expectation of payment. Then, in October 1998, there was a gap. The records went silent. Marcus Rivera disappeared from the medical community as if he had never existed. Robert had traced his entry into the United States in early 1999 on a work visa, his employment history at various hospitals and custodial positions, and his eventual permanent residency status. But there was no trace of him ever attempting to reclaim his medical license, no record of him even acknowledging his former profession. For 26 years, one of the most skilled emergency physicians in Central America had been pushing a mop. Thomas sat in his temporary office at the State House, the file spread before him, felt a fury building in his chest. It wasn't directed at Marcus. It was directed at a world that could let this happen, that could allow guilt and trauma to bury talent that was desperately needed. How many people had died in the past 26 years who could have been saved by Marcus's skills? How many emergency rooms could have benefited from his experience? The waste of it was staggering. His secretary knocked gently on the door. "Governor, your mother's asking for you. She says it's important." Thomas found Eleanor Eleanor sitting up in bed, her color significantly improved, a tray of half-eaten hospital food beside her. She had regained enough strength to be imperious, which Thomas took as an excellent sign. She pointed at the chair beside her bed. "Sit. We need to talk." "Mom, you should be resting." "I've been resting for 3 weeks. I'm tired of resting." She fixed him with the look that had terrified him as a child when he'd done something wrong. "The nurses tell me a janitor saved my life. They say you've been asking questions about him all over the hospital. They say you threatened to sue the doctors who were treating me." Her eyes narrowed. "What exactly happened while I was sleeping?" Thomas took a deep breath and told her everything. The 25 doctors who had given up. Marcus walking into the room at the exact right moment. The displaced tube that should have been caught. Marcus's past as a brilliant physician haunted by a tragedy. As he spoke, Eleanor listened with the intense focus she had always brought to important matters. The same focus she had used when listening to his childhood problems and his adult political crises. When he finished, Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she said with perfect clarity, "I want to meet him." "Mom, I don't think that's necessary. You need to focus on getting better." Eleanor's voice took on the steel that Thomas knew better than to argue with. "A man saved my life, and I haven't had the chance to thank him. I was raised better than that, even if you apparently weren't." She softened slightly. "Besides, he sounds like someone who needs to be thanked. Someone who needs to know that what he did mattered." Thomas made the call himself, reaching Marcus on the hospital's internal line. The janitor was hesitant, almost fearful, but he couldn't refuse the direct request of a patient. That evening, just after the dinner trays had been collected, Marcus appeared in Eleanor's doorway wearing his gray uniform, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "I'm glad to see you looking so much better." Eleanor studied him with the sharp intelligence that had carried her through 7 decades of life. "Come here, young man. Don't make an old woman shout across the room." Marcus approached the bed, and Eleanor extended her hand. He took it carefully, as if afraid it might break. Eleanor held his hand firmly and looked directly into his eyes. "My son tells me I would be dead if not for you. He tells me you saw what a small army of fancy doctors miss. He tells me you spoke up when it would have been easier to stay silent. Is that true?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I just happened to notice something that needed attention. Any good clinician would have done the same. But you're not officially a clinician, are you?" Eleanor said gently. "You're a man mopping floors, yet you stopped and you looked and you cared enough to risk humiliation to say something." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you. Thank you for my life. Thank you for giving me more time with my son and my grandchildren. Thank you for not walking away." Marcus's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You're welcome, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm truly glad you're recovering." Eleanor didn't release his hand. "My son also tells me you used to be a doctor. A good one who saved many lives before tragedy made you walk away." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I understand guilt, Marcus. I understand how one moment can define everything that comes after. When my husband died and left me with a small boy and no money, I felt guilty for years. Guilty that I couldn't give Thomas the life his father would have given him. Guilty that I had to work so much I missed school plays and baseball games. Guilty that he wore secondhand clothes and ate pasta 4 nights. Mom," Thomas said softly, but Eleanor held up her free hand, silencing him. "But you know what I learned?" Eleanor continued, her voice strong despite her weakened state. "Guilt is only useful if it teaches you something, if it makes you better, kinder, more careful. But if it just makes you hide, if it makes you waste the gifts you were given, then it's not guilt anymore. It's just cowardice dressed up in noble clothing." Marcus flinched as if struck, but Eleanor's expression remained gentle, almost loving. "You are a healer, Marcus. That's not something you can scrub away with floor cleaner. It's in your bones and your blood, and the way you see the world. I was lying in that bed dying, and you couldn't stop yourself from healing. Even after 26 years of hiding, even knowing it might expose you, you had to help, because that's who you are." "I've failed people," Marcus whispered. "I made a decision that killed 6 innocent people. How do I come back from that?" "You don't," Eleanor said simply. "You don't come back from it. You carry it. You let it make you wiser and more compassionate, but you don't let it destroy the good you can still do. Because those 6 people didn't die so you could spend the rest of your life mopping floors. They died in a tragedy that wasn't your fault, and the only way to honor them is to make sure their deaths weren't the end of your story." Marcus's tears finally spilled over, tracking down his weathered cheeks. He tried to pull his hand away, but Eleanor held firm. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I'm terrified of making another wrong call, hurting someone else." "Good," Eleanor said firmly. "Fear makes you careful. Fear makes you triple-check your decisions. Fear keeps you humble, but fear shouldn't make you invisible." She finally released his hand and leaned back against her pillows, suddenly looking exhausted. "Now I'm tired, and you probably have floors to mop or whatever it is you do. But I want you to think about something. If you had walked past my room that day, if you had kept your mouth shut because you were afraid, I would be dead. My son would be planning my funeral. My grandchildren would have lost their grandmother. Is that the kind of man you want to be? The one who stays silent when speaking up could save a life?" Marcus stood frozen, Eleanor's words wrapping around him like chains and wings all at once. Finally, he nodded. "Once. I'll think about it, Mrs. Whitmore. I promise. After Marcus left, Thomas sat in silence with his mother. The room was dim, just the soft glow of the monitors and the hallway lights seeping under the door. Finally, Thomas spoke. That was intense, Mom. Eleanor smiled tiredly. That man is carrying a weight that's going to crush him if someone doesn't help him set it down. You're the governor. You have resources, connections, power. Use them. To do what? Eleanor closed her eyes, her voice fading to a whisper. To give him a reason to stop hiding. To give him a second chance at being who he was meant. Everyone deserves that, Thomas. Even the man who saves lives while pretending he's just cleaning up after them. The story leaked, as stories in hospitals always do. It started with whispers among the nursing staff, traveled through the doctor's lounge, and eventually found its way to a junior reporter at the Boston Globe who happened to be visiting a friend in the cardiac unit. Within 48 hours of Eleanor's conversation with Marcus, the headline blazed across the front page. Janitor saves governor's mother after 25 doctors give up hope. The article was sensational, dramatic, and unfortunately for Marcus, mostly accurate. It painted him as a humble hero, the doctors as incompetent villains, and Eleanor as a miracle survivor. Thomas's press secretary fielded over 200 media requests in the first 6 hours. National news networks wanted interviews, talk shows, extended invitations. Social media exploded with heated debates about medical hubris, immigrant contributions to society, and the value of experience over credentials. Thomas tried to contain the firestorm, but it had a life of its own. The hospital administration went into crisis mode, issuing carefully worded statements about procedural reviews and patient safety protocols. Dr. Pemberton and his team faced internal investigations, their professional reputations suddenly under intense scrutiny. The medical board launched an inquiry. Lawyers began circling, scenting blood in the water, and Marcus disappeared. He stopped showing up for his shifts. His small apartment in Roxbury, a modest one-bedroom in a building that had seen better days, stood empty. His phone went straight to voicemail. It was as if the media attention had driven him underground, back into the shadows where he had been comfortable for over 2 decades. Thomas felt personally responsible. He had promised Marcus's confidentiality, had assured him that helping wouldn't expose him, and now the man's face was plastered across every news outlet in New England. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from his staff, from reporters, from well-meaning constituents who wanted to know what the governor was doing to honor the hero janitor. But Thomas ignored them all. He had a more important mission. He found Marcus on the 8th day of his disappearance. Not through official channels or private investigators, but through a chance conversation with a nurse who mentioned that her church ran a free clinic in Dorchester. She had seen someone matching Marcus's description volunteering there, helping translate for Spanish-speaking patients and organizing the medication donations. Thomas drove there himself, no security detail, no press secretary, just a man looking for another man who needed to be found. The clinic was housed in the basement of St. Mary's Catholic Church, a tired building in a neighborhood that time and prosperity had forgotten. Thomas descended the worn concrete steps and pushed open the heavy door. Inside, the space was cramped and crowded, filled with people waiting on mismatched chairs. Children played on a threadbare carpet while their parents filled out forms in multiple languages. The air smelled of antiseptic and hope struggling against impossible odds. He found Marcus in a small supply room, counting bottles of blood pressure medication and recording numbers in a worn ledger. He didn't look up when Thomas entered. "I wondered when you'd find me," Marcus said quietly. Thomas closed the door behind him, muffling the chaos outside. "You've been avoiding me, I've been avoiding everyone." Marcus set down the ledger and finally met Thomas's eyes. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be a story. I didn't ask to have my past dragged out for public consumption. I wanted to help your mother and then disappear back into the life I'd built. A simple life, a safe life, a wasted life," Thomas said, his voice gentle but firm. He gestured to the supply room, to the clinic beyond. "Is this what you call disappearing? You're still healing, Marcus. You're just doing it where you think no one will notice." "This is different," Marcus insisted. "This is organizing supplies, helping with translation, filling gaps. It's not making life or death decision. It's not holding someone's fate in my hands." Thomas pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos until he found the one he was looking for. His mother sitting up in bed yesterday, smiling at the camera with her grandchildren on either side of her. "This is my mother 3 days ago. She's being discharged tomorrow. The doctors say she'll make a full recovery." "Full, Marcus. She's gonna dance at my daughter's wedding someday because you couldn't stay silent." Marcus looked at the photo and something cracked in his carefully maintained composure. "I'm glad. Truly I am. But one success doesn't erase decades of failure." "You haven't failed for decades," Thomas said, his voice rising with frustration. "You've been hiding. There's a difference. And now, because you finally did what you were meant to do, you're running again. Only this time you're not running from guilt. You're running from responsibility, from the possibility that you might actually have to be who you are." Marcus turned away, his hands gripping the edge of the supply shelf. "You don't understand the weight of it. Every time I make a medical decision, I see their faces. The pilot, Mateo's mother, the other patients. They trusted me, and I killed them with my arrogance." "No," Thomas said firmly. A hurricane killed them, a storm that destroyed thousands of homes and killed thousands of people. You tried to save them and the storm won. That's not murder. That's not malpractice. That's just the terrible, random cruelty of nature. I should have waited, Marcus whispered. The pilot said it wasn't safe. I should have listened. And if you had waited, if Mateo had died while you played it safe, would you have forgiven yourself for that? Thomas moved closer, his voice softer now. Marcus, I've been in politics for 20 years. I've made decisions that affected millions of people. Some of those decisions have had consequences I never intended. Policies that hurt people I was trying to help. Compromises that betrayed principles I swore to uphold. I carry those failures every single day, but I keep making decisions because the alternative is paralysis. The alternative is letting the world happen to people instead of trying to shape it into something better. Marcus finally turned to face him, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. What do you want from me, Governor? Why can't you just let me be? Because my mother is right, Thomas said. You're a healer. It's not something you chose, it's something you are. And the world has too few healers to let you waste what you have because of one tragedy 26 years ago. Before Marcus could respond, there was a commotion outside the supply room. Raised voices, urgent and afraid. Both men rushed out to find a small crowd gathered around a woman who had collapsed in the waiting area. She was middle-aged, Hispanic, clutching her chest and gasping for air. Her teenage daughter knelt beside her, crying and speaking rapid Spanish. Someone call 911, a volunteer shouted, already dialing on her phone. Thomas watched as Marcus stood frozen, his face pale, his hands trembling. This was the moment, the test, the choice between safety and purpose. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Marcus didn't move. Then, as if pulled by invisible strings, he dropped to his knees beside the woman. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking her pulse, her pupil, feeling her neck. When did this start? He asked in fluent Spanish. The daughter stammered out an answer. 20 minutes ago. Then trouble breathing. She has diabetes and high blood pressure. Marcus's voice became calm and authoritative. The voice of someone who had done this 1,000 times in 1,000 emergencies. Get me the blood pressure cuff and the glucose monitor. Now. Someone bring me oxygen if we have it. You, he pointed at another volunteer, get the AED from the wall just in case. People scrambled to obey, responding to the unmistakable tone of medical command. Marcus continued his assessment, his movements sure and precise. Within 90 seconds, he had a blood pressure reading, a glucose level, and a working diagnosis. She's having a hypertensive crisis, possibly a heart attack. Her blood pressure is dangerously high and her sugar is through the roof. We need to stabilize her before the ambulance gets here. The volunteers brought what supplies the clinic had, meager but functional. Marcus administered medication, adjusted her position, kept up a steady stream of reassuring words in Spanish to both the patient and her daughter. By the time the paramedics arrived, the woman's breathing had eased and her color had improved. Marcus gave them a rapid professional report using medical terminology that made them look at him with new respect. Who are you? One of the paramedics asked. Just a volunteer, Marcus said quietly. After the ambulance left, the clinic settled back into its usual controlled chaos, but everyone was looking at Marcus differently now. The volunteers, the patients waiting to be seen, even the part-time nurse practitioner who ran the clinic. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a transformation from a quiet man organizing supplies to a doctor commanding an emergency with absolute authority. Thomas approached him slowly. You saved her life, just like you've saved my mother's. Marcus sat down heavily in one of the waiting room chairs, his adrenaline clearly crashing. His hands were still shaking. Did you see? He asked, looking up at Thomas with haunted eyes. Did you see how my hands shook? How I froze for those first few seconds? That hesitation could have killed her. That's what I'm afraid of. That moment when I should act, but I can't because I'm paralyzed by fear. But you did act, Thomas said, sitting beside him. Yes, you hesitated. For 3 seconds you were afraid. Then you did what needed to be done. That's not failure, Marcus. That's being human. The doctors upstairs in the fancy hospital with all their credentials, they hesitate too. They second-guess themselves. They make mistakes. The difference is they keep going. They trust that their training and experience will guide them more often than not. Marcus looked around the crowded clinic, at the faces of people who couldn't afford the gleaming hospitals downtown, who came to basement clinics run by volunteers because it was their only option. These people need help, he said softly. Real help, not just someone to hand them an aspirin and a pamphlet. Yes, Thomas agreed. They do, but I can't practice medicine. I don't have a license. I haven't practiced in decades. I don't even know if I remember half of what I used to know. The medical world has changed. Technology, procedures, medications, I'd be starting from zero. So start from zero, Thomas said. Take the exams again, do a refresher course. Whatever it takes, I'll help. The state will help you. There are programs for foreign-trained doctors, for people returning to medicine after time away. It won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching a mother try to comfort a crying toddler across the room. Why? He finally asked. Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. I helped your mother because I couldn't stop myself. That doesn't create a debt. You're right, Thomas said. I don't owe you a debt, but I owe the next person who needs you, and the person after that, and the 1,000 people after them. I owe it to them to make sure you're not hiding in a basement when you could be in an emergency. when you could be teaching other doctors, when you could be using everything you've learned, including the mistakes, to make medicine better. He pulled out a business card and pressed it into Marcus's hand. This is the director of the Massachusetts Medical Board. Her name is Dr. Patricia Okonkwo. I called her this morning. She's expecting your call. They have a pathway for people in your exact situation. It'll take time, it'll take work, but it's possible. The question is whether you're ready to stop running. Marcus stared at the business card in his hand as if it were a live grenade. The simple white rectangle with its embossed letters represented everything he had fled from for 26 years. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, Director, Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine. Below that, a phone number and an email address. 2 simple pathways back into a world he had abandoned. He slipped the card into his pocket without a word, and Thomas didn't push. Some decisions couldn't be rushed, couldn't be forced. They had to germinate in the dark soil of a person's soul until they were ready to break through into the light. Thomas left the clinic with a promise to check in, and Marcus remained behind. Sitting among the people who needed help, he was still too afraid to fully give. Over the next week, Marcus existed in a strange liminal space. He didn't return to his janitorial position at Boston General. The hospital administration had quietly suggested through official channels that perhaps he might want to consider other employment opportunities given the media attention and the ongoing investigation into the medical team's oversight. It was a polite firing wrapped in the language of mutual understanding and best interests. Marcus didn't fight it. He had no desire to return to those sterile hallways where everyone now knew his story. Instead, he found himself at the church clinic every day, arriving before it opened and staying until the last patient was seen. He organized the supply closets with the precision of a military operation. He created a better system for tracking patient visits and medication inventory. He translated for the nurse practitioner, helping bridge the language gap that left so many patients confused and frightened. He was useful, productive even, but he was still hiding behind tasks that didn't require him to make critical decisions. The business card sat on his bedside table, a small white rectangle that seemed to glow in the dark, calling to him. Some nights he would pick it up, his phone in his other hand, ready to dial, but the memories would flood back. Mateo's small face, pale and still. The boy's mother's screams when they told her the helicopter had crashed. The weight of 6 deaths that he could never undo, no matter how many lives he might save in the future. On the 10th day after Thomas's visit to the clinic, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. He was restocking bandages when a woman in her mid-70s entered the supply room. She moved slowly with a cane, but her posture was erect and her eyes were sharp. Eleanor Whitmore had come to find him. "Mrs. Whitmore," Marcus said, immediately standing and moving to help her to a chair. "You shouldn't be here. You were just discharged from the hospital. You should be resting." Eleanor waved away his concern and settled into the folding chair with a sigh. "I've been resting for days. I'm bored out of my mind. Besides, I needed to see where the man who saved my life was hiding himself." Marcus flinched at the word hiding. "Seems everyone can see right through me." "That's because you're not very good at it," Eleanor said with a slight smile. "A man who's truly hiding doesn't save people, doesn't volunteer at free clinics, doesn't know the names of every patient who walks through that door." She gestured toward the waiting room. "I've been watching you for the last hour. You know them all. The young mother with 3 children who can't afford prenatal care. The old man with diabetes who keeps skipping his medication because he has to choose between insulin and rent. The teenage boy with the infected cut who's terrified of going to a real hospital because of his immigration status. You know them and they trust you. I just help where I can," Marcus said quietly. "No," Eleanor corrected. "You love where you can. There's a difference. Helping is transactional. Loving is transformational. You love these people and they feel it. That's why they keep coming back to this basement instead of going somewhere more convenient." Marcus sat down across from her, suddenly exhausted. "Your son gave me a business card, a path back to practicing medicine officially. I've been staring at it for days and I still can't bring myself to make the call." "Why not?" Eleanor asked simply. Marcus looked at his hands, those calloused hands that had once performed surgeries and now mostly pushed brooms and sorted supplies. "Because I'm afraid," he admitted. "I'm afraid that I've lost whatever gift I had. I'm afraid that medicine has changed so much I won't be able to keep up. I'm afraid that I'll make another mistake, and this time I won't have the excuse of a hurricane or limited resources. It'll just be me failing with no one to blame but myself." Eleanor nodded slowly as if she had expected this answer. "Let me tell you a story, Marcus. When my husband died, I was 32 years old with an 8-year-old son and no job skills beyond being a mother and a wife. I was terrified. I had no idea how to support us. The first job I applied for was as a secretary. They turned me down because I couldn't type fast enough. I cried in my car for an hour, convinced I was going to fail my son, that we'd end up homeless or in some terrible situation." "What did you do?" Marcus asked. "I applied for another job, and another. And another. I got rejected 17 times before someone finally hired me to clean houses. It wasn't what I wanted, it wasn't what I thought I was capable of, but it was a start." She leaned forward, her voice intense. "I was terrified every single day. Terrified I'd lose a job and we'd miss rent. Terrified I'd get sick and have no one to take care of Thomas. Terrified I was ruining my son's life by not being able to give him the things other kids had. But you know what I learned? Fear doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. Sometimes fear means you're on exactly the right path, doing something that matters so much that the possibility of failure is genuinely frightening." Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. "But what if I fail again?" "Then you fail. Eleanor said simply. You pick yourself up and you try again, just like I did, just like my son has done 100 times in his political career, just like every single doctor in that hospital upstairs has done at some point. She reached out and placed her hand over his. Marcus, you've been punishing yourself for 26 years for being human, for making a decision in an impossible situation. Don't you think that's long enough? Don't you think those 6 people would want their deaths to mean something more than the end of your career? The tears finally spilled over, tracking down Marcus's weathered cheeks. He made no move to wipe them away. I miss it, he whispered. God help me. I miss it so much. The adrenaline of an emergency, the puzzle of a diagnosis. The moment when everything comes together and you know exactly what needs to be done. I've spent over 2 decades trying to kill that part of myself and it just won't die. That's because it's not meant to die, Eleanor said gently. It's meant to be used. It's meant to be honed and refined by experience. Even painful experience. She stood slowly, leaning on her cane. I came here today to tell you something, Marcus. When I was lying in that hospital bed, when those 25 doctors had given up on me, I wasn't unconscious the whole time. There were moments of awareness, brief flashes where I could hear voices. I heard them telling my son to let me go. I heard them saying there was no hope. Marcus looked up at her, startled. And then I heard your voice, Eleanor continued. I couldn't understand the words, but I heard the certainty in your tone. I heard you arguing with them, insisting they check something. And in that moment, even though I couldn't open my eyes or move or speak, I felt hope. Your voice gave me permission to keep fighting. She smiled. You want to know why you froze for those 3 seconds when that woman collapsed? Because you're not the arrogant young doctor who thought he could outwit a hurricane anymore. You're a man who knows the weight of life and death, who understands the responsibility. And that makes you exactly the kind of doctor the world needs. After Eleanor left, Marcus sat alone in the supply room for a long time. The sounds of the clinic filtered through the door. Children laughing, mothers comforting, the nurse practitioner explaining medication instructions in patient, careful English. It was the sound of people caring for people, the fundamental heartbeat of medicine, stripped of its expensive machines and insurance codes and corporate hierarchy. He pulled out his phone and the business card. His hands trembled as he dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a professional voice answered. Dr. Okonkwo's office? How may I help you? Marcus took a deep breath. My name is Dr. Marcus Rivera. I believe Dr. Okonkwo is expecting my call. There was a brief pause, then the voice warmed considerably. Dr. Rivera, yes, please hold. I'll put you through immediately. Another moment of silence, then a new voice, rich and confident. Dr. Rivera. This is Patricia Okonkwo. Governor Whitmore told me to expect your call. I've been hoping you'd reach out. Marcus closed his eyes. I'm not sure where to start, Dr. Okonkwo. It's been a very long time since I practiced medicine. Call me Patricia, she said kindly, and we start with a conversation. I've reviewed your history, your training, your work in Central America. I've also read the news stories. You saved Governor Whitmore's mother with clinical observation that 25 licensed physicians missed. That tells me your instincts are still sharp even after all these years. Instincts aren't enough, Marcus said. Medicine has changed dramatically since I last practiced. You're absolutely right, Patricia, which is why we have a pathway for doctors in your situation. It's not easy and it's not quick, but it's possible. You'll need to pass the U.S. medical licensing examinations, complete a refresher program, and likely do some supervised clinical work to demonstrate current competency. Given your background, I'd estimate it's a 2 to 3 year journey back to independent practice. 2 to 3 years, Marcus repeated. The timeline felt both impossibly long and strangely manageable. I know it sounds daunting, Patricia said, but consider this. 3 years from now, you'll be 60 years old. You can be 60 years old working as a physician again, or you can be 60 years old still hiding from your calling. Either way, those 3 years are going to pass. The only question is what you'll have accomplished during. The logic was irrefutable. Marcus found himself nodding even though she couldn't see him. What's the first step? The first step is an interview, Patricia said. Come to my office next week. We'll review your credentials, discuss your goals, and map out a personalized plan. I'll be honest with you, Dr. Rivera, the board has some concerns. You have a significant gap in your practice. There will be scrutiny, but after what you did at Boston General and from what I hear, what you're doing at the church clinic, I believe you have what it takes to complete this journey. Marcus felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as hope, genuine hope. For the first time in 26 years. I'll be there, he said. And Patricia, thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance. After he hung up, Marcus sat in the quiet supply room surrounded by bandages and medication bottles and the humble tools of healing. He thought about Mateo, about the 5 other people who had died in that helicopter. For 26 years, he had tried to honor their memory by disappearing, by ensuring he could never make such a costly mistake again. But Eleanor was right. That wasn't honoring them. That was just another tragedy. A 7th death that had happened in slow motion. He would never forget them. He would carry their memory into every examination room, every emergency, every critical decision. They would make him careful, thoughtful, humble, but they would no longer make him silent. The journey back to medicine was harder than Marcus had imagined, and he had imagined it would be nearly impossible. The first obstacle came during his interview with Dr. Patricia Okonkwo when she laid out the brutal reality of his situation. He sat in her office on the 12th floor of a downtown Boston building, surrounded by diplomas and medical journals, feeling like an imposter who had wandered into the wrong world. Your medical degree from the University of Panama is excellent, Patricia said, reviewing his transcripts through reading glasses perched twitched on her nose. Your residency training in Mexico City is well documented, but you have a 26-year gap in clinical practice. That's unprecedented. Most physicians who take extended breaks are gone for 5, maybe 10 years at most. You've been away for more than a quarter century. Marcus nodded, his stomach tight with anxiety. I understand. Patricia looked up at him, her expression serious but not unkind. The U.S. medical licensing examination has 3 steps. Step 1 covers basic sciences. Step 2 covers clinical knowledge and skills. Step 3 covers patient management. Most doctors take these during medical school and residency. You'll be taking all 3 as a 60-year-old man competing against test takers who are in their 20s and 30s. Whose medical education is fresh. The weight of the challenge settled over Marcus like a heavy coat. How many people in my situation have successfully completed this process? Patricia removed her glasses and met his gaze directly. In the past decade, 7 foreign-trained physicians with gaps of 15 years or more have attempted to gain licensure in Massachusetts. 3 succeeded, 4 failed, and gave up. Those odds would have broken him a month ago, but something had changed in Marcus during those conversations with Thomas and Eleanor. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it no longer had the power to paralyze him. What was different about the 3 who succeeded? Patricia smiled, the first real warmth she had shown. They wanted it badly enough to sacrifice everything else. They studied 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours a day. They put their lives on hold. They faced failure and embarrassment and kept going. She leaned forward. The question isn't whether you're smart enough or skilled enough, Dr. Rivera. The question is whether you're desperate enough. Marcus thought about the woman at the church clinic, the one whose hypertensive crisis he had managed. He thought about his mother's voice in his ears as a child telling him he had healing hands. He thought about the 26 years he had wasted being afraid. I'm desperate enough, he said quietly. Then let's begin. The next 18 months became a blur of textbooks, practice exams, and clinical rotation. Marcus moved out of his small apartment and into an even smaller efficiency closer to the medical library. He sold his television, canceled his internet service except for what he needed for online study materials, and eliminated every distraction from his life. He woke at 5 in the morning and studied until midnight, 7 days a week. Thomas Whitmore became an unexpected ally in this journey. The governor, whose mother was now fully recovered and back to her volunteer work at community centers, took a personal interest in Marcus's progress. He arranged for Marcus to shadow physicians at Boston General, unofficial observations that didn't require licensing but gave Marcus's crucial exposure to modern medical practice. He connected Marcus with other foreign-trained doctors who had successfully navigated the relicensing process. He even quietly paid for Marcus's exam fees and study materials, refusing to take no for an answer. You saved my mother's life, Thomas said when Marcus tried to refuse the help. This is not charity. This is an investment in the kind of healthcare system I want to see in this state. We need more doctors like you, not fewer, but the support couldn't make the work easier. The first time Marcus sat for the Step 1 exam, testing his knowledge of basic sciences, he failed by 18 points. The failure hit him like a physical blow. He sat in his efficiency apartment that night, staring at the score report, and felt the old familiar voice of doubt creeping back in. You're too old. You've been away too long. You should quit while you still have some dignity left. He almost listened. He almost packed up his study materials and went back to the simple safety of menial work. But then his phone rang. It was Eleanor Whitmore, calling from the community center where she was organizing a food drive. I heard you didn't pass your first exam, she said without preamble. Good. Marcus was stunned. Good? Yes. Good, Eleanor repeated firmly. Now you know what it feels like to fail at this. Now you know it's not going to be easy, that you can't coast on old knowledge. Now you can actually get serious about studying instead of assuming your brilliant mind from 30 years ago will be enough. Her tough love was exactly what he needed. I don't know if I can do this, Eleanor. Of course you don't know, she said. Nobody knows if they can do something until they've done it. That's what makes it worth doing. Stop whining and get back to study. You have 4 months until you can retake the exam. Are you going to waste them feeling sorry for yourself, or are you going to do something about it? Marcus started laughing despite himself. You're a harsh woman, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm a woman who doesn't have time for self-pity. Neither do the patients at that church clinic who keep asking when Dr. Rivera is coming back. Now hang up and study. He took the exam again 4 months later and passed with a score that surprised even himself. Step 1, completed. 2 more to go. Step 2 was both easier and harder. The clinical knowledge came back to him more naturally than the basic sciences had. His years of practical experience, even if they were decades old, gave him an intuitive understanding of patient care that younger test takers often lack. But the clinical skills portion required him to interact with standardized patients, actors trained to present with specific symptoms. Marcus, who had always been comfortable with real patients, found himself freezing in these artificial encounters. The performance aspect of it felt fake, staged, and his anxiety showed. He failed the skills portion on his first attempt, passed the knowledge portion but failed the practical. The standardized patients had rated him as nervous, hesitant, and lacking confidence. The irony wasn't lost on him. He could manage a real emergency with calm authority, but put him in a room with an actor pretending to have chest pain, and he fell apart. Clinical supervisor at Boston General, Dr. Sarah Chun, the same pulmonologist who had been part of the team treating Eleanor, pulled him aside after he received the results. You're overthinking it, she said bluntly. You're so worried about making a mistake that you're making mistakes. Real patients don't judge you for pausing to think. Real patients don't care if you fumble your words a little. They care that you're present, that you're listening, that you care. But in those exam rooms, you're not present. You're in your head, reliving that helicopter crash from 26 years ago. Her assessment cut deep because it was accurate. How do I stop doing that? Marcus asked. You don't, Sarah said. You accept that it's part of you and you move forward anyway. She smiled slightly. You know what I realized after you caught my mistake with Massar's Whitmore? I had been so confident in my diagnosis that I stopped actually looking at the patient. I was treating numbers on a screen instead of a human being. You taught me something that day about humility and observation. Now let me teach you something. Confidence isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite fear. Marcus retook the clinical skills exam 6 weeks later. This time he didn't try to be perfect. He didn't try to remember every protocol and procedure with flawless precision. He just tried to be himself, the doctor who had spent 15 years in rural clinics treating people who had nothing. He allowed himself to be nervous, to stumble over a word, to take a moment to think, and he passed. Step 3 came 14 months after he had started this journey. It was the final hurdle. The exam that tested his ability to manage patients over time, to make decisions about ongoing care. By this point, Marcus was exhausted. He had lost 20 pounds from stress and irregular eating. His hair had gone completely silver. He looked a decade older than when he had started, but his eyes had something they hadn't had in 26 years: purpose. The night before the exam, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his apartment reviewing notes he had already memorized, drinking bitter coffee, feeling the weight of everything riding on this single test. At 2 in the morning, there was a knock on his door. He opened it to find Thomas Whitmore standing in the hallway, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, completely without his usual security detail. "Governor, what are you doing here?" "Couldn't sleep," Thomas said. "Figured you couldn't either." He held up a bag. Brought donuts, the good kind from the Polish bakery in Southie. They sat at Marcus's small kitchen table, eating donuts and drinking coffee, not talking about the exam or medicine or anything important. Thomas told stories about his mother's latest crusade to reform the public housing system. He shared embarrassing anecdotes about his teenage children. He talked about the new puppy his wife had surprised him with, a rescue dog that had already destroyed 2 pairs of expensive shoes. "Why are you really here?" Marcus finally asked. Thomas finished his donut and brushed crumbs from his hands. "Because 20 months ago you walked into my mother's hospital room when you could have just kept pushing your cleaning cart. You spoke up when staying silent would have been safer. You risked everything to save someone you didn't even know." He looked Marcus in the eye. "Tomorrow you're going to walk into that exam room and you're going to be nervous and maybe even terrified. But you're going to remember that fear didn't stop you before and it's not going to stop you now." "What if I fail?" Marcus asked, voicing the terror that had been gnawing at him for months. "Then you take it again," Thomas said simply. "And if you fail again, you take it again. You keep taking it until you pass or until they literally will not let you take it anymore. Because that's what people who save lives do. They don't give up." He stood, preparing to leave. "Get some sleep, Marcus. Or don't. Either way, you've got this." After Thomas left, Marcus lay down on his narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. He thought about Matteo, as he always did before important moments. But this time, instead of seeing the boy's lifeless face, he imagined what Matteo might have become if the helicopter had made it. A teacher, perhaps. A father, a man who contributed something meaningful to the world. That life had been stolen by tragedy, but Marcus suddenly understood that wasting his own life in penance didn't honor Matteo's memory. Living fully, healing completely, giving everything he had to his calling, that was the real tribute. He took the exam the next day in a state of exhausted calm. He didn't second-guess himself. He didn't let panic override his instinct. He simply answered each question as honestly and thoughtfully as he could, drawing on 3 decades of experience and 20 months of intense study. When he finished and walked out of the testing center, he had no idea if he had passed or failed, but he knew he had given it everything he had. The results took 3 weeks to arrive. 3 weeks during which Marcus existed in a strange, suspended state, unable to move forward or back. He continued volunteering at the church clinic, but his mind was elsewhere, constantly circling back to questions he thought he might have answered incorrectly, scenarios he could have handled better. Doctor Patricia Okonkwo called twice to check on him, her voice warm with encouragement, but even she couldn't predict the outcome. On a gray Tuesday morning in November, Marcus was organizing donated winter coats at the clinic when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something in his gut told him to answer. He stepped into the supply room and closed the door. "Dr. Rivera, this is the testing service. I'm calling regarding your Step 3 examination results." Marcus's heart hammered so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. "Yes, congratulations, Dr. Rivera. You've passed all components with scores well above the minimum requirement. Your results have been forwarded to the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine." The room seemed to tilt. Marcus sat down heavily on a box of supplies. "I passed? You passed," the voice confirmed. "You should receive official documentation within 5 to 7 business days. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Marcus couldn't speak. His throat had closed with emotion. He managed a strangled thank you before ending the call. Then he sat in that small supply room surrounded by bandages and medicine bottles and winter coats, and he wept. 26 years of penance, 20 months of grueling study, countless hours of doubt and fear, all culminating in this single moment. He had done it. Against odds that would have defeated most people, He had clawed his way back to being a doctor. His first call was to Thomas Whitmore. The governor was in a budget meeting, but his secretary put Marcus through immediately when he identified himself. "Tom," Marcus said, his voice still thick with tears. "I passed." There was a moment of silence, then Thomas's voice came through, jubilant and relieved. "Marcus, that's incredible. When did you find out?" "Just now. I can't quite believe it's real." "It's real," Thomas said firmly. "You earned this. Every single hour you studied, every obstacle you overcame. This is your victory." He paused. "How does it feel?" Marcus considered the question. "It feels like I can finally breathe again, like I've been holding my breath for 26 years and I just remembered how to exhale." "That's because you have been," Thomas said. "Listen, cancel whatever you're doing tonight. Mom and Claire and I are taking you to dinner. A real celebration, no arguments." That evening, they gathered at a small Italian restaurant in the North End, far from the political spotlight and media attention. Eleanor arrived looking radiant in a deep blue dress, her health fully restored. She hugged Marcus tightly when she saw him, whispering in his ear, "I knew you could do it. I never doubted for a second." They ordered too much food and drank wine that was probably too expensive. And for the first time in recent memory, Marcus allowed himself to simply enjoy the moment. Thomas raised his glass in a toast. To Dr. Marcus Rivera, who prove that it's never too late to reclaim who you're meant to be. They clinked glasses, and Marcus felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the wine. But as the evening wore on and the conversation flowed, reality began to set in. Passing the exams was only the first step. He still needed to complete a supervised clinical program before he could practice independently. He would need to find a hospital willing to take on a 60-year-old doctor with decades of rust on his skills. He would need to prove himself all over again, not through multiple choice questions, but through actual patient care. The doubts must have shown on his face because Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Stop it," she said gently. "Stop borrowing trouble from tomorrow. Tonight we celebrate. Tomorrow we figure out the next step." But the next step found Marcus before he could find. 2 days after his celebration dinner, he received a call from Dr. Sarah Chun at Boston General. "Marcus," she said without preamble, "we need to talk. Can you come to the hospital this afternoon?" Marcus arrived at her office confused and slightly anxious. Sarah sat behind her desk, a stack of papers in front of her, her expression serious. "Marcus, I've been authorized by the hospital board to make you an offer. We want you to complete your supervised clinical requirement here at Boston General in our emergency department." Marcus stared at her. "The emergency department? That's one of the most demanding rotations. Most returning physicians start with something simpler." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "We don't need simple, Marcus. We need someone who can handle the chaos, who has real-world emergency experience, who can make critical decisions under pressure. Your background in rural emergency medicine is exactly what we're looking for. Plus," she added with a slight smile, "you've already proven you can see things our regular staff misses." Marcus felt overwhelmed. "This is incredibly generous, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of intensity. It's been so long since I worked real emergency." Sarah pulled out a folder and opened it. "Do you know how many diagnostic errors occur in emergency departments across the country every year? Hundreds of thousands? Do you know the primary cause? Not lack of knowledge or technology, it's cognitive bias. It's doctors seeing what they expect to see rather than what's actually in front of them." She looked up at him. "You don't have that problem, Marcus. You look at patients with fresh eyes because you've been away. You question assumptions because you know how dangerous certainty can be. Those aren't weaknesses. They're exactly what emergency medicine needs." "What would the timeline look like?" Marcus asked, his mind racing through possibilities. 6 months of supervised work, Sarah said. "You'd be paired with an attending physician for every shift. You'd handle patient intake, make preliminary assessments, recommend treatment plans. But everything would be reviewed and approved before implementation. It's intensive, demanding, and honestly, it's going to be exhausting. But at the end of 6 months, if you perform well, you'd be eligible for full privileges." Marcus thought about the church clinic, about the people who depended on him there. "What about my volunteer work? I can't abandon them." Sarah smiled. "We're not asking you to. Emergency medicine is shift. You'd work 3 to 4 12-hour shifts per week. That leaves plenty of time for other commitments." She slid a packet across the desk to him. "Take this home. View it. Think about it. But Marcus, I need you to know something. This isn't charity. This isn't us doing you a favor because you helped the governor's mother. We're making this offer because we genuinely believe you'll make our emergency department better." Marcus took the packet home and read through it that night. The terms were more than fair. The schedule was manageable. The supervisory structure was designed to support rather than undermine him. Everything about the offer was perfect, which was exactly why terror gripped his heart. This was it, the moment he had been working toward for almost 2 years. The chance to actually practice medicine again, to put his knowledge and skills to use in life or deaths. And all he could think about was how many ways it could go wrong. He called Patricia Okonkwo the next morning. "I got the offer from Boston General," he told her, "for the emergency department." "I know," Patricia said. "Sarah Chun called me to discuss it. It's an excellent opportunity, Marcus. The ED is where you'll learn the most and grow the fastest." "I'm terrified," Marcus admitted. "What if I freeze up in a real emergency?" What if my first critical patient dies because I hesitate or second-guess myself? Patricia was quiet for a moment. Let me ask you something. When that woman collapsed at the church clinic, what did you do? I froze for a few seconds, then I helped her. Exactly, Patricia said. You froze, then you helped. That's what trauma does, Marcus. It makes you pause. But it doesn't make you incapable. Every doctor who's experienced loss or made a mistake carries that weight. The good ones learn to work with it, not against it. Your pause isn't weakness. It's your brain protecting you, making sure you're certain before you act. As long as the pause is seconds and not minutes, you're fine. Marcus took a deep breath. I think you should accept, Patricia confirmed. But more importantly, I think you already know you're going to accept. You're just looking for permission to be afraid while doing it. She paused. You have my permission, Marcus. Be terrified. Be anxious. Be uncertain. Just don't be absent. Those patients need you, fear and all. Marcus called Sarah Chun that afternoon and accepted the position. His start date was set for 3 weeks later, right after Thanksgiving. 3 weeks to mentally prepare himself for stepping back into the controlled chaos of emergency medicine. 3 weeks to say proper goodbyes to his life as a maintenance worker and volunteer organizer. 3 weeks to transform from Dr. Marcus Rivera in theory to Dr. Marcus Rivera in practice. Thomas insisted on taking him shopping for proper medical attire. You can't show up in your first week wearing janitor's uniforms, he joked as they walked through a medical supply store. Marcus emerged with 3 pairs of dark blue scrubs, comfortable shoes designed for 12-hour shifts, and a new stethoscope that Thomas insisted on buying despite Marcus's protests. The night before his first shift, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed reviewing everything he had studied, every protocol and procedure, every possible emergency scenario. His phone buzzed at 11:30 with a text message from Eleanor. Stop studying and go to sleep. You know more than you think you do. Trust yourself. He smiled at the message, but sleep still eluded him. Finally, at 2 in the morning, he got up and looked at the photograph he kept on his dresser. The picture from Guatemala, him in his white coat with his wife beside him, both of them young and full of hope and purpose. His wife had died 8 years ago, cancer taken her just as it had taken so many people he loved. But she had known about his past, about Mateo and the helicopter, about his self-imposed exile from medicine. Before she died, she had made him promise one thing, that he wouldn't waste the rest of his life hiding from his gift. I'm trying, Maria, he whispered to the photograph. I'm finally trying. The emergency department at Boston General Hospital was a symphony of controlled chaos. Marcus walked through the double doors on his first morning and was immediately overwhelmed by the sensory assault. Monitors beeping in different rhythms, radios crackling with incoming ambulance reports, family members crying or arguing with administrative staff, the sharp smell of antiseptic mixing with blood and fear. It was everything he remembered from his years in rural clinics, amplified by modern technology and urban density. His supervising physician was Dr. James Martinez, the infectious disease specialist who had been part of the team treating Eleanor Whitmore. James was in his early 50s, with kind eyes and the permanent exhaustion that came from years of emergency medicine. He greeted Marcus with a firm handshake and no trace of condescension. "Welcome to the controlled insanity," he said. "Ready to get your hands dirty?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, his heart already racing. The first few hours were a baptism by fire. Marcus shadowed James through case after case, watching how he triaged patients, made rapid assessments, and juggled multiple emergencies simultaneously. A teenager with a suspected appendicitis, an elderly man having a stroke, a construction worker with a compound fracture, a young mother with postpartum depression contemplating suicide. Each case required different skills, different approaches, different levels of urgency. James let Marcus take the lead on a simple case around noon, a 10-year-old boy with a laceration on his forehead from falling off his bike. Marcus examined the wound, noting its depth and location, checking for signs of concussion, asking the boy questions while simultaneously reassuring the anxious father hovering nearby. It was basic emergency medicine, the kind of thing he could have done in his sleep 30 years ago, but his hands trembled slightly as he prepared to suture the wound. "You've done this 1,000 times, James said quietly, standing just behind him. "Trust your training." Marcus took a deep breath and began. The muscle memory was still there, buried under layers of rust and fear. His fingers found their rhythm, placing sutures with practiced precision. The boy barely flinched, distracted by Marcus's stories about treating children in mountain villages who would walk miles for medical care. When Marcus finished and stepped back, the repair was clean and professional. "Nice work," James said approvingly. The father thanked him profusely, and Marcus felt a small glow of accomplishment. One success, one step forward. But the emergency department didn't allow anyone to rest on small victories. An hour later, the radios crackled with an incoming trauma alert. Multi-vehicle accident on the highway. Multiple casualties en route. All hands on deck. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the department shifted into crisis mode. Trauma teams assembled. Gurneys were prepared. The attending physicians started barking orders, assigning personnel to different incoming patients. "Rivera, you're with me on the second arrival," James said. 30-year-old female, unconscious, significant head trauma, possible internal injuries. "Follow my lead and do exactly what I tell you." The ambulance bay doors burst open and the first patient came through, then the second. Marcus's patient was a young woman, her face covered in blood, her breathing shallow and irregular. The paramedics rattled off vital signs and mechanism of injury while they transferred her to the hospital gurney. James immediately began his assessment, his movements swift and efficient. Marcus stood beside him, trying to absorb everything, his mind racing through trauma protocols he had studied but never practiced in a modern setting. "Rivera, I need you to establish the fourth axis," James ordered. 2 large bore lines, left and right antecubic. Marcus moved into position, his hands shaking. He could feel the eyes of nurses and technicians on him, watching the new doctor judging his competence. He found the vein, inserted the catheter, secured the line. 1 down. He moved to the other arm. The woman's blood pressure was dropping. She was bleeding somewhere internally and every second counted. His second attempt at 4-axis failed, the catheter slipping past the vein. "Try again," James said, his voice calm but urgent. "You've got this." Marcus repositioned, took a breath, tried again. This time the catheter slid home perfectly. Blood flashed back, confirming placement. He secured it and stepped back. 2 lines established. James was already ordering blood products and calling for imaging. The woman was rushed to CT scan, and Marcus stood in the trauma bay, his scrubs splattered with blood, his entire body shaking with adrenaline. "Good job," James said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That second stick was under pressure. You kept your head." "I almost failed," Marcus said. "Almost doesn't count in medicine," James replied. "You succeeded. That's all that matters." He gestured toward the waiting area where more patients were arriving. "Come on, we've got 6 more to see before lunch." The days blurred together. Marcus worked 3 12-hour shifts per week, each one a marathon of decision-making and physical endurance. He treated everything from minor ailments to life-threatening emergencies. He learned the rhythms of the modern emergency department, the electronic medical record system, the consulting protocols, the insurance requirements that hadn't existed in rural Central America. He made mistakes, small ones that James caught before they became dangerous. He had successes, patients who thanked him, families who appreciated his calm demeanor and careful explanations, but the old demons still haunted him. Every time he faced a critical decision, every time a patient's condition deteriorated unexpectedly, he felt the weight of those 6 deaths from 26 years ago. The fear of repeating that mistake never fully left him. It manifested as extra caution, sometimes too much caution. James had to push him several times to make faster decisions, to trust his instincts rather than overthinking every possibility. "You're clinically excellent," James told him after 3 months. "Your diagnostic skills are sharp, your patient manner is wonderful, your technical abilities are solid, but you're too slow. In emergency medicine, sometimes good enough right now is better than perfect 5 minutes from now. You need to find that balance." Marcus knew James was right, but knowing something intellectually and implementing it emotionally were 2 different things. The breakthrough came in his 4th month during a shift that started ordinarily and became extraordinary. It was a Tuesday evening, the department moderately busy but manageable. Marcus was treating a middle-aged woman with severe abdominal pain when the radios erupted with an emergency alert. Incoming pediatric trauma. A 7-year-old boy struck by a car while riding his bicycle. Severe head trauma. Unstable vitals. Estimated arrival 4 minutes. Marcus felt ice flood his veins. 7 years old, the same age as Mateo. He stood frozen in the hallway, his mind immediately transported back to that clinic in Honduras, to the small broken boy he had insisted on evacuating, to the helicopter that had never made it. "Rivera," James called, seeing him standing motionless. "You're with me. Let's go." Marcus couldn't move. His legs felt like concrete. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was going to fail. He was going to freeze when it mattered most. He was going to watch another 7-year-old boy die because he couldn't overcome his trauma. Then he felt a hand on his arm. He looked up to see Dr. Sarah Chun, who must have been passing through the department. She leaned in close and whispered just 2 words, "You're ready." Something broke loose inside him, or maybe something clicked into place. Marcus took a deep breath and followed James to the trauma bay. The ambulance arrived moments later and the small boy was wheeled in, his body frighteningly still, his face pale beneath the oxygen mask. Marcus looked at him and didn't see Mateo. He saw a patient child who needed help right now. Not in 5 minutes after Marcus had worked through his psychological barriers, James began calling out orders, coordinating the trauma team. Marcus moved into position, his training taking over. He assessed the boy's breathing, checked his pupils, palpated his abdomen for internal injuries. The boy's name was Oliver. He was 7 years old. He liked dinosaurs and video games. His parents were in the waiting room, terrified and praying. "Rivera, what's your assessment?" James asked, testing him. Marcus rattled off his findings with calm precision. Decreased breath sounds on the left side suggesting possible pneumothorax. Pupils unequal suggesting increased intracranial pressure. Abdomen rigid suggesting internal bleeding. He needs chest decompression. He needs neurosurgery consult immediately, and he needs to get to the OR now. James nodded approvingly. "Then let's move. Chest tube now." This was it, the moment Marcus had been dreading for 26 years. A critical procedure on a critically injured child. One mistake could mean death. But as Marcus picked up the scalpel and prepared to insert the chest tube that would allow Oliver to breathe properly, his hands were steady. His mind was clear. He wasn't thinking about Mateo or the helicopter or the weight of past failures. He was thinking about Oliver, about giving this child the chance to grow up, to keep loving dinosaurs and video games, to have a life. The procedure took 90 seconds. Marcus made the incision, inserted the tube, tube and immediately heard the rush of air that confirmed the pneumothorax. Oliver's oxygen levels began to rise. His color improved slightly. It wasn't a miracle or a cure, but it was progress. It was life being sustained by skill and quick action. Oliver was rushed to surgery while Marcus stood in the trauma bay, his scrubs bloody, his body exhausted, his mind finally, at peace. James approached him with an expression of deep respect. "That was exceptional work, Marcus. You made the call, you executed perfectly, and you probably saved that kid's life." Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. For 26 years, he had believed that his moment of judgment in that Honduran clinic had defined him as a failure. But now he understood something fundamental. That moment didn't define him. This moment did. And every moment after this, when he chose to show up, to try, to give everything he had despite his fear. Over the next week, Marcus followed Oliver's recovery. The boy survived the surgery and began the long road to healing. His parents, when they learned that Marcus had been the one to perform the initial life-saving procedure, came to find him. The mother hugged him tightly, her tears soaking into his white coat. "You gave us our son back," she whispered. "How can we ever thank you?" Marcus thought about Mateo's mother, about the thanks he never got to hear, the gratitude that had been stolen by tragedy. "You just did," he said softly. 6 months after walking through the emergency department doors for his first supervised shift, Marcus Rivera stood in the same conference room where the medical board had once discussed discontinuing Eleanor Whitmore's life support. But this time, the room held a different energy entirely. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo sat at the head of the table, flanked by hospital administrators, department chiefs, and senior physicians. Marcus's performance reviews were spread before them. Months of evaluations documenting his clinical skills, his patient interactions, his growth from hesitant returner to confident practitioner. Dr. Rivera. Patricia began, her voice formal but warm. "We've completed our review of your supervised clinical requirement. Your supervising physicians have provided unanimous recommendations for independent practice privileges. Your patient satisfaction scores are among the highest in the emergency department. Your diagnostic accuracy exceeds departmental averages, and your ability to remain calm under pressure has been noted repeatedly." James Martinez spoke up from his seat. "I have supervised a lot of returning physicians over my career. Some are rusty but competent. Some struggle and eventually wash out. Marcus is neither of those. He's exceptional. His years away from medicine didn't diminish his skills. They deepened his compassion and sharpened his observational abilities. He sees things other doctors miss because he never takes anything for granted." Sarah Chun nodded in agreement. "When Dr. Rivera first came to us, he was terrified of making mistakes. That fear made him overly cautious. But over these 6 months, I've watched him learn to work with his fear rather than against it. He's developed into exactly the kind of emergency physician we need more of. Thoughtful, skilled, genuinely committed to patient care over ego." Patricia smiled at Marcus. "Dr. Rivera, the board is pleased to grant you full privileges to practice emergency medicine at Boston General Hospital. Effective immediately, you are no longer under supervision. You are a fully credentialed attending physician. Congratulations and welcome back to medicine." The words didn't feel real at first. Marcus sat there, stunned, as the room erupted in applause. Doctors who had watched his journey, nurses who had worked alongside him, administrators who had taken a chance on a janitor with a buried past, all of them celebrating this moment. Patricia stood and shook his hand formally, then pulled him into a brief hug. "You earned this," she whispered. "Every single day you earned this." That evening there was another celebration dinner, this time larger and louder. The private room at the Italian restaurant was filled with people who had become family over the past 2 years. Thomas and Claire Whitmore with their teenagers. Eleanor, looking vibrant and healthy, holding court at one end of the table. James Martinez and Sarah Chun, who had become mentors and friends. Patricia Okonkwo, who had believed in him when belief required faith more than evidence. Staff from the church clinic who had watched him transform from volunteer organizer to practicing physician while never abandoning his commitment to serving the underserved. Thomas stood to give a toast, his politician's voice filling the room with easy authority. 2 years ago, I was standing in a hospital room being told that my mother was dying. 25 doctors had examined her, and all 25 had given up hope. Then a janitor walked in and saw what they had missed. He raised his glass toward Marcus. That janitor saved my mother's life, but more than that, he saved his own. He stopped hiding from who he was meant to be. He faced his demons, conquered his fears, and reclaimed his purpose. Tonight, we celebrate not just a doctor returning to practice, but a man returning to himself. To Marcus, the room echoed the toast. Glasses clinking, voices warm with genuine affection. Marcus felt overwhelmed by it all. 2 years ago, he had been invisible, purposefully so, hiding behind a maintenance uniform and a carefully constructed life of safety. Now he was surrounded by people who saw him, truly saw him, and valued not just what he could do, but who he was. Eleanor caught his eye from across the room and gestured for him to come sit beside her. When he did, she took his hand in both of hers. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Being Dr. Rivera again instead of just Marcus, the janitor." Marcus considered the question carefully. "It feels like I'm finally both. The janitor taught me humility and observation. He taught me to see people who are usually invisible, to value work that goes unnoticed, to understand that worth isn't determined by title or prestige. I don't want to forget him. I don't want to forget what those years taught me." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Good. The best doctors remember what it's like to be powerless. They remember what it's like to be unseen. That's what makes them healers instead of just technicians." Over the following months, Marcus settled into his new life with a sense of rightness he hadn't felt in decades. He worked his emergency department shifts with growing confidence, handling everything from minor injuries to major traumas. His colleagues respected him. His patients trusted him, and he began to trust himself. The fear never fully disappeared. Every critical case still carried echoes of Mateo and that helicopter crash, but the fear had transformed from a paralytic force into a focusing one, making him more careful without making him incapable. He continued volunteering at the church clinic on his days off, but now with full credentials. He could prescribe medication, order proper diagnostic tests, and provide follow-up care that the volunteer nurse practitioner couldn't legally offer. The basement clinic became a bridge between the wealthy, high-tech world of Boston General and the struggling community that couldn't access traditional healthcare. Marcus existed in both worlds comfortably, never forgetting that a person's value wasn't determined by their insurance coverage or zip code. One Saturday morning, Marcus was at the church clinic when a family came in. The mother was young, maybe 25, with two small children clinging to her legs. She spoke Spanish with a Guatemalan accent, and when Marcus greeted her in the same language, her relief was palpable. "My son," she said, gesturing to the older child, a boy of about 6. "He's been having terrible headache. The other clinics say it's nothing, just tension, but I know something is wrong." A mother note. Marcus knelt down to examine the boy, his movements gentle and unhurried. The child was frightened, overwhelmed by the strange environment and his own pain. Marcus began asking questions in Spanish, making conversation about the boy's favorite things while simultaneously conducting a careful neurological assessment. As he examined the child's eyes with a pen light, he noticed something subtle. The boy's pupils responded to light, but there was a slight lag, a barely perceptible delay that most doctors would miss or dismiss. Marcus felt a cold certainty settle over him. He maintained his calm demeanor, not wanting to frighten the mother or child, but his mind was racing through differential diagnoses. "I'd like to get some imaging of his head," he told the mother, "just to be safe. I can make a call and get him seen today at the hospital where I work." 3 hours later, the boy was in a CT scanner at Boston General. Marcus stood with the radiologist watching the images appear on the screen. There it was, a small but growing brain tumor, pressing against structures that would eventually become life-threatening. Caught early, it was treatable. Caught late, it would have been catastrophic. The radiologist looked at Marcus with respect. "How did you catch this? Most pediatricians would have missed it. The symptoms are so nonspecific." His mother knew something was wrong, Marcus said simply. "I just listened to her and looked carefully." He thought about all the ways this could have gone differently. If the mother had given up after being dismissed by other clinics, if Marcus had been too busy at Boston General to volunteer that day, if he had brushed off her concerns like other doctors had, the chain of chance and choice that led to this child getting the help he needed was fragile and beautiful. That evening, Marcus stood on the roof of Boston General Hospital looking out over the city lights, the same view he had seen countless times while pushing a maintenance cart, invisible and silent. But now he stood here as Dr. Marcus Rivera, a physician who had lost his way and found it again, who had failed and learned from failure, who carried his ghosts not as burdens but as guides. His phone buzzed with a message from Thomas. "Heard about the kid you diagnosed today. You're officially unstoppable. Mom wants to know if you're coming to Sunday dinner. No is not an option." Marcus smiled and typed back his acceptance. As he put his phone away, he thought about the strange, winding path that had led him here. A hurricane in Honduras, 26 years of hiding, a chance encounter in a hospital, a governor who refused to let him disappear, a mother who believed he could heal. Thought about Mateo as he always did. But now when he pictured the boy's face, he also pictured Oliver, the 7-year-old who had survived his emergency treatment. He pictured the Guatemalan child who would now receive the care he needed for his brain tumor. He pictured all the patients he would treat in the years to come, all the lives he would touch, all the difference he could still make. The past didn't disappear, the guilt didn't vanish, but they had been transformed into something else, into humility, into caution, into a deep, abiding commitment to seeing every patient clearly, to questioning every assumption, to never taking the gift of healing for granted. Marcus Rivera had been a celebrated doctor, then a guilt-ridden exile, then an invisible janitor, and now a physician again. But he understood finally that all of these identities were part of the same journey. He wasn't reclaiming who he used to be. He was becoming who he was always meant to be. Someone who had been broken and remade, who carried his failures as lessons and his successes as responsibilities. 25 doctors had said there was no hope for Eleanor Whitmore. The janitor had said move aside, and in doing so had saved not just her life but his own. And now Dr. Marcus Rivera would spend the rest of his career making sure that no one was ever dismissed, that no voice went unheard, that no patient was ever just a number on a chart. He would practice medicine the way it was meant to be practiced, with skill and compassion in equal measure, never forgetting what it felt like to be invisible, and never letting anyone else feel that way on his watch. The city lights glittered below him like fallen stars, and Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in 26 years. Not just hope, but purpose. Not just survival, but life. He took a deep breath of the cool evening air and headed back inside. He had a shift starting in an hour, and somewhere in that emergency department, someone needed a doctor who knew how to truly see them.